If you're interested in what I look like in real life, then make sure you check out my Instagram at Joe the Insomniak. This happened when I was probably 7 or 8. When I was a kid, I lived in a pretty sketchy neighbourhood. We lived in those long apartments. Ones are attached to the sides rather than stacked on top of each other. The front of the apartment faced a main road, and there's a little street to access the park and woods and back area of the apartment. Behind the apartments is a massive field and a forest. Me and my friends and I used to go there to build hobbit holes in the grass. My mum hated it when we went out there because there were some rough people that lived in the neighbourhood. She didn't like the idea of 7-year-olds playing out there in the same place where people do drugs. I'm adding some more details so you can get a picture. Now one day, I was out in the woods by myself, just exploring and pretending to be Indiana Jones or something, and I was coming out of the tall grass. I could see the little back alley in between the parking area and the woods, and I saw something lying in the grass. I believe it's a deer. I think it's just sleeping, so I creep up on it, trying to not scare it. I know, cool. That was quite funny. When I got there, I knew something was off. The deer was too still and smelled horrible. I couldn't see its face, and its back was facing me, but when I got up to it, I nearly had a heart attack when I saw its entire stomach is ripped open. I wasn't a smart kid, but I knew this was messed up. When I turned to run back home to tell my mum, I saw another deer nailed to a tree next to the first. I don't know how I didn't notice this before, but its 2 front hooves are literally nailed to it. It's a disgusting scene, as you can imagine. As I stood there, staring at it, a car drove past a little alley. I remember it's a white car with tinted windows driving really slowly. I mean, everyone drove slowly on this alley because it's a residential street, but these people were barely moving. I can't see inside, but I got the sinking feeling that they were watching me. Obviously, I can't be sure that they are, but I'm 99% sure it was them. Once they were gone, I booked it home and told my mum the whole thing. She told me not to go in the field again, and I agree. I really hated what I saw. For the next month or so, I saw that car drive everywhere. It would drive up and down the main road I was on while I was playing in the front yard. It would drive down and back towards the alley when I would be back in the yard. I even remembered seeing it at a grocery store once, but they were definitely staking the house out. It was always the white car, tinted windows, maybe they're following me, and always driving way too slowly to be normal. I tell my mum about it, but she chalks it up to a neighbour just going down the road. So one day, my mum was out mowing the lawn. Because of the way the apartment is, she had to push the lawnmower all the way around the apartments to get to our backyard. Being the helpful kid I was going to meet my mum out the back to open the gate so she can put the lawnmower in the shed. As I'm walking out the gate, I see the car come along the back alley. Normally, the car goes slow. As soon as it turns a corner, however, the driver steps on the gas, zooming up behind me. The back door closest to me opens and someone gets out and starts running towards me. I don't remember what he looked like or even if it was a he. I just remembered getting back home as quick as I can, terrified. After that, my dad yelled at me for peeing myself, and neither he nor my mum believed me about the guy in the car, and I never saw him again, and we moved a few months later. That sounds really harsh, Jesus. My parents still think I made up the whole thing, even though they thought how sketchy the neighbourhood was. I don't remember anyone going missing at that time in my town, but I never really looked it up. All I know is it was really messed up, and I have no idea who those people were on why they did that to the deer or what they planned for me. I just hope they never done anything to anyone else. This happened a few years ago, and we didn't know exactly who this man was, but it still scared me senselessly. When I was about 13, I used to have my bed right under my bedroom window. It was also around the time my dog was brought inside because she got too old to stay out. At the time, we didn't have screens covering the doors like we do now, or the windows, so the windows could easily be opened and there's no barrier. I always left my window open during the day to let in fresh air, then close and lock it when it starts getting dark. The house is surrounded by forest, not very thick, but still thick enough that you can't clearly see through it. It's completely normal to hear strange noises at night, because things like bears or stray dogs or even former neighbours' chickens would roam around through our backyard. So when I heard something shuffling around my window, I didn't think much of it, and continued playing video games. Not even 10 minutes later, I heard something hit against it. It may have just been a large June bug. When they hit a window, it sounds like rocks being thrown, so I literally ignore it. The knocking kept going, but I just kept ignoring it until finally it stopped. Fast forward until around 2 AM. I was finally settling down and going to sleep when I hear breathing. Very faint, enough to miss if my room wasn't silent. I heard something drag down my window, like a stick or finger. I did it a few times, and that was enough for me. I jump out of bed, running to my dad's room. I told him that there was something at my window, and he immediately came to look. We turned on the lights, and nothing's there. I told him what I heard, and he said he's gonna look in the morning. We did just that, and my stomach churned. Under my window, there were 2 completely different foot tracks, one back and forth besides the generator, looking directly under my window. There's even cigarette butts laying on the floor, and ashes. Like they've been there for a while. The foot tracks led towards the woods, and seemed to stop there. We have no idea who this was, and to this day even thinking of this terrifies me. Afterward we put locks on the windows and screens up, but I'll never forget that day. Okay, so this was a normal rainy evening when I was 14. I played games until my mum come in and told me to go to sleep. But before I get to the creepy parts, I'll give you an overview of our home. Our house is located on a hill. The closest neighbours are literally 100 meters further at the road. This road leads to nowhere, so there are rarely people going past our home. Behind the house is a little forest area that I used to play in as a child. And also, the house has 2 floors. My room is at the 2nd upper floor. Yeah, I gotta admit it's a lonely house, with rain, darkness, and a forest that could keep me a little bit worried if I didn't know what was in there. So I went to sleep as usual at 11 PM. I fell asleep very quickly. However, at 3 AM I woke up, and I didn't do that so often. I think I had to go to the bathroom or something, so I went to pee and look through the window and do my thing. But it wasn't that relaxing nightly forest that I saw. My eyes glued on a specific character in the darkness. A man wearing dark clothes was just standing at the path of the forest. I don't know what he was doing. I started to panic, of course, and switched off the bathroom lights really quick. I sneak up to my parents downstairs, and I've never felt so afraid moving in my home in my life. We had alarms on, but it didn't calm me. I took a look at my parents. They're asleep. My sister's not up either. I went to the kitchen and peeked through the window. There he was, still standing at the pathway, closer now. And now I can see his body. I can't figure out his face. He looks huge. I just sat at the window, scared and almost falling to tears. Little rain poured to the ceiling and made naturally chill sounds. That didn't help. I peeked through the window again, and I almost jumped out of my skin when he's standing in the yard now. I can see his face. He looks terrifying. I now ran to my parents to wake them up. My father ran out the back door, but my mum said that he could be dangerous and might be armed. She calls the police. Movement inside the house made the guy move, and he runs towards the road and the forest. My father swore that he couldn't go after him, but was mad that he couldn't. Now we wait for the cops to show up. Eventually they show up and ask questions and check out the forest with my dad. At this point, I went to sleep again with my mum, terrified but managed to sleep. I still have nightmares about this today. When I was young, me and my brother loved to go and play and explore in the forest near where we lived. We had a group of neighbourhood friends that we'd also do this with, and to be honest, those were some of my best memories. However, this would all change one day, and everything seems like normal. We set off on a normal summer's evening, and we decide we're going to play hide and seek. Now to get to where we play, we have to walk through a bit of a swampland. I say swamp, it's not really a swamp, but it feels very similar to one. So we're walking through this, stumbling around, and finally make it to the giant tree. This is the exact tree that marks the spot where we play. So, I have to look for people unfortunately, but it's my turn, so that's fine. I hide behind this tree and start counting. I finally get to 1 and say I'm ready for you lot. And I burst out laughing when I see one of my stupid friends has literally climbed on top of the tree, hit directly above me, got caught instantly, then starts panicking that he can't get down. I help him down and I say, "You search the left side, I'm gonna go a bit deeper and find these." He says fine. To be honest, more than anything, I can't wait to tell the others how stupid he was. As I'm walking, I see something up ahead. It's a dark figure. I laugh and start sprinting up there. I stumble on the way and hurt my knee though, so I was quite annoyed about this. But by the time I get there, the figure's moved. Now I'm looking around and something feels very odd. It feels like I'm being watched, but not like in hide and seek. This is almost like a much darker, ominous presence is there. I've literally never had a feeling like it since then. So I look around when I see part of a hand. Well, it's not a hand, it's a stick that looks like a hand, but I can make out what it is in the shadows. As I get closer, I see it's holding something. I think that's really odd. I get a bit closer and realise that it's a skeleton hand. One that looks slightly degraded, like it's been there for some time. Halloween's around the corner, so I'm sure it's a Halloween prop. I hold up the piece of paper and look inside. It says run. It's not in any of my friend's handwriting. And then, to my horror, I see a shadow appear behind me. I glance back for a second, and there's 2 giants of men standing there in full camo gear, with smirks on their faces. I drop the paper and let out this blood-curdling scream, and I begin to sprint my way back. I end up going all the way to the tree, and to my horror, I'm met by all of my friends there, who can see how scared I am, and we all sprint all the way back home. When I get there, I explain what's happened, and my brother's so scared he starts crying, where he's younger than me. We're more scared of getting in trouble with our parents, don't even bother telling them. But looking back on it now, I really wish I'd done something more at the time, like told the authorities or something. I hate the thought that there's some twisted, mental people out there that would do something like this. God knows what their intentions were, but I can guarantee you that they weren't good. A little backstory first. I grew up in upstate New York, about 30 minutes north of Syracuse to be exact. It only made sense that I would return to my quiet little part of the world after I got out of the Marines in 2007. The only problem is that I didn't have much money. The good news is that my grandfather had an old pool behind camper that he told me I could have until I got on my own feet. So, being on my own, I decided I'd spend about a year in the pool behind on a few acres of woods that I bought from a friend of mine while I was in the Marines. Now all my taxes had been paid for the year, so the only thing I had to do was pay for gas and propane. I managed to avoid looking like a crazy mountain man by showering and washing my clothes at a local truck stop / diner, even getting a pretty decent job working security. I filled the rest of my time working odd jobs for extra cash. Alright, so for the main story. It was mid-April. I was sitting next to a nice low fire while listening to my battery-powered radio, watching nightfall in the woods. I had gotten a nice dinner at the diner down the road, so I didn't have any work for the next few days. Generally, I don't see anyone in the woods for weeks at a time, so I wasn't expecting it when I hear a scream to break the silence. I shot up, grab my shotgun, and get out of the camper and check the chamber to make sure it's loaded. I stood on the edge of a small clearing, strained my ears to listen for any sounds. It's generally hard to pinpoint sounds in the dead of night in the woods, but luckily I hear some shouting and car doors slamming, so I knew that the sounds had to be coming from the main vehicle trail a short distance from my campsite. I made my way to the trail as fast as I could in the low light, and before I get halfway there, I heard another clipped scream to my left. I could hear a rustling in the brush. I slowly made my way there, and to where I think the noise is coming from, I come out of the woods right next to a man who had a woman pinned to the ground, just standing over her. Shaking from adrenaline, I leveled the shotgun at the top of the guy, and the woman growled at him to get off. Now I'm a big guy, but I have no doubt that the shotgun was the deciding factor in this whole situation. Each of these guys easily had a solid 30 pounds of muscle on me when I was a 200-pound Marine. I ushered the two idiots back, so I was between them. The woman's now getting to her feet. It was about now I realised we have another problem. My cell phone was cheap and didn't get reception in the woods, and hers had been broken by these two sickos. There wasn't much I could do other than march these two back to their jeep under the threat of shotgun. I get the license number, and I'm sure it was fake, and a description of them and their vehicle. Before the driver gets in the vehicle, I lower the shotgun to his crotch and made sure he understood what a 3-inch 12-gauge shell loaded would do. They took off in one direction. Me and the woman made our way back to my campsite. We drove to the DEC station and reported it as quick as possible. It turns out that the guy I'd threatened was the young girl's now ex-boyfriend. They'd been out having a few drinks when the third wheel in the situation got a little too handsy for her liking. When she said something to her boyfriend, he basically told her to stop and get on with it for once. When she refused, the boyfriend smashed her phone and pushed her to the ground. They both pushed her into the truck and drove her deep into the woods. She had waited for them to become complacent before throwing the back door open and jumping out and taking off. Luckily, the Jeep was crap and the back door didn't lock. It was a stroke of luck that I happened to be outside when she escaped. Fast forward 7 months, and that woman I helped is now my wife, and we moved into our first house using the money I saved up living in the woods. We've been married for 8 years now, and I have 2 kids, a 6-year-old boy and a 4-year-old girl. I still go out to camp every year to hunt and haven't seen the Jeep or the guys again. We heard through the grapevine that they had been arrested and actually got jail time. I'm assuming they moved to a different area because I never saw them again. I live in a suburban part of a small rural town in eastern Missouri, in a pretty quiet neighborhood. We've had one crime here in the past 3 years, and it was me who committed it. A jaywalker. Comprised mostly of elderly women and single mothers. We own 4 vehicles: my car, my mum's van, my stepdad's car, and my mum's old truck that's illegal to drive now. So I was home alone, about a week after my graduation, while my stepdad's at work. My mum was talking to my youngest brothers, and they had to go to the doctor's office, so they left. And my 2 middle brothers were at their friend's house, so I was lounging on the couch in my fuzzy robe and underwear playing Fallout. Good game. My stepdad is a professional chef and does 80% of our cooking at home. I have terrible anxiety and an addiction to investigation discovery. So whenever I'm home alone, I keep the longest, sharpest knife on myself or within an arm's reach at all time. It may have saved my life. Or something. This is confusing. There's a knock at the door, and it's not too suspicious. We frequently get solicitors and Mormons in the neighborhood, so I wasn't worried. Being a cautious person, I peek out through the curtains just a bit to see who it was. I'd seen this guy around the neighborhood before, walking around, and I don't feel threatened by him, since if it got physical, I had at least 5 inches on him, and a knife. Anyway, I want to open the door, and I do so, figuring that at worst, I can politely turn him away, tell him I wasn't interested and go on with my life. At best, well, not gonna lie, he's cute in a generic way. So, I open the door, resting my hand on the back of the couch, where I've hidden the knife under a blanket, just in case. As soon as I opened the door, I knew there's something off. I've got a blunted effect due to a combination of depression, PTSD from abuse, and schizophrenic type personality disorder. So, I'm grown up, and I'm used to using fake facial expressions to fit in. I thought maybe he had similar problems because his face was not normal. He had a big friendly smile, right below a pair of absolutely dead eyes. "Hey beautiful, day out. Mind if I come in for a moment?" he said awkwardly. I kinda smile awkwardly and say, no, my mum don't like having strangers in. "Oh," his smile gets bigger. "What are you doing?" At this point, I'm starting to feel nervous. I shrug. Can't complain, I guess. "Are you here to sell something or tell me about God?" He shrugged back. "Oh, you know? Can I come in? Maybe talk to your mum?" I'll go get her. She's in the backyard." I moved to close the door and step back, not turning my back to the dude. Before I closed the doorway, he reached out and stops the door. His fake smile is gone. His face is dead. Not angry, just dead. "You're home alone. Your mum isn't in the backyard." I pause and swallow hard. Then I push the door again. "What do you want, man?" "To come in. Please let me in." I reach over, quickly sliding the knife from under my blanket and pointing it at him, saying, I'm not gonna let you in. Leave. He looks down at the knife, back up at me, blinks rapidly, then asphyxiated the smile to his face again, saying, "Oh, no problem. Goodbye." I watched him turn around and walk back down the street until he turned the corner. Then I locked and deadbolted every door and window in the house, got the dog out of my mum's bedroom and resumed my gaming. I ended up calling my aunt's boyfriend, the only cop I trust, let him know what happened, stayed on the phone with him until my mum got home from the doctors. She called around town, found a couple of other people who'd seen him walking and driving around, but none of them knew who he was. So we were on high alert for about a week. It's been over a month now, and nobody in town's seen him. This old memory of mine, I've been talking about a lot because of the recent news of the Delefi murders. As the man I'm talking about looks similar to the first sketch, but this is 20 years ago and the sketch is now irrelevant. But anyway, when I was 12, I lived in Flagstaff, Arizona. If you're not familiar with this part of Arizona, it's not what you think of when you think of Arizona. It's a pondosora pine forest with mountains, and it snows in the winter. Anyway, across the street from my home was an entrance to some woods with paths. As my parents worked, and I was the first one home after school, it was my responsibility to walk the dog. Usually, I would take him just inside the woods entrance so I wouldn't have to pick up his crap from under the rocks that would usually be in sight. Now, usually, I was too afraid to go into the actual woods, even with my dog, because he was stronger than me and didn't listen to me well when we were outside. The other reason I didn't like it is the wolves, packs of wild dogs, sometimes cattle, seriously, and of course, anything lurking. But this day, I felt adventurous, I guess, and took him over there. We went pretty deep that day, and I didn't see another soul because it's about 3 PM and the people are at work. None of the neighborhood kids really hang out there either. Now my dog was excited by anything that moved and always wanted to greet another person, cat or dog. But this day, on the way back, I remembered him being steadfast, still pulling, walking me along on the way back home, ignoring squirrels and trees blowing in the wind. Then, out of nowhere, a man appeared on the trail in front of me. Now when I say out of nowhere, that's exactly what I mean. The woods are not dense, and usually you can see people from a mile away, as long as they don't surprise you. The man was dressed head to toe in brown and tan colours and gave a weak "hey" and doesn't make eye contact. The way he dressed stuck out to me, as everything but the treetops was brown, as there's actually a drought going on at the time. Even the picture I linked is more greener than it was then. As he passed me, I took a few more steps and turned around because he made uneasy and steady pace behind me, but he was gone. I could see probably 50 feet of the trail behind me. There's no reason I shouldn't be able to see him still. My kid brain starts going, maybe it's a ghost. No, he must be hiding. There's no way I wouldn't be able to see him immediately after passing each other. Maybe he was hiding in front of me, before he came out of nowhere. Maybe that's why he's got all brown on, trying to blend in. The dog didn't want to greet him anyway. It didn't make sense. It didn't take long for my dog and I to take off running all the way home. Thank God I had my goofy dog on me, because he was pretty aloft, but also protective. For all I know, maybe the disappearing woodsman watched me take my dog out every day, saw me wander in that day. I know I let my dog crap in the yard a few weeks afterwards. The reason it was so weird is that he was pretty much in perfect camouflage, and he had no dog on him or reason to be out there. I'm not sure exactly who it was. It definitely wasn't a hunter either, because hunting's illegal, and that's what creeps me out. Why on earth would anyone be in camouflage in the woods where hunting's illegal? My boyfriend and I went backpacking in the mountains. I'd been camping before, but only camping in a car, so never had to carry a bag on me for a long period of time. So this is my first time actually backpacking. Now after getting lost trying to find a parking lot, the map swore there was, but there actually wasn't. We drove around the mountains, finally finding a parking lot we could stay at. We'd planned to walk down the mountain, camp, then walk back up the following day. About an hour in, it's maybe 6 PM, and we come across this guy sitting off the side of the trail, cooking in a cheap stove. He said to us if we know why we're there and where we're at, and saying can we point him in the direction of a certain place on the mountain. He says he's parked there. He continues talking about how he had a friend drop him off who was going to pick him up at point A, and then changes his story to that he's parked at point B, and then said another friend dropped him off and went to hike somewhere else, and that he needed a map or something to get to point C. Yeah, I'm confused, and I don't like his story. We finally bid the dude good luck, saying we can't help, and continue down the trail. Now the trail is poorly marked and doesn't correspond with the map we found online, so we're really confused when we come to a horse trail with no markings to tell us if we're on the right path still. We decide to go down the trail and see if we can find a place to camp for the night, and find our way out in the morning. Both sides of the trail are lined with barbed wire, preventing us from being able to camp there. Eventually, we run into a huge puddle in the middle of the trail. We decide to turn back and go back to the part of the trail before it turns into a horse trail. That way, we can camp there for the night, because it's really dark and we're tired. About 20 feet behind us, we see the man from earlier. He talks to us again, and through conversation, we learned he had heavy narcotics, including fentanyl, and another one I don't remember the name of. By this time, there's so many red flags, so we took off, deciding to go back to the car and just drive home now. We live 4 hours away, and we're about 6 miles from the car, so we take off up the trail as fast as we can go. I got severely dehydrated on the way and was struggling. I have lots of water, but it's very hot out, and we're practically running up the mountain now. Eventually, I start hallucinating, thinking I'm vomiting blood, which is red Gatorade, or there was blood coming from my shoes, which is sweat, and there may or may not have been a bear somewhere nearby, but I could have hallucinated it also. We ended up doing the full 6 miles up the mountain in only 2 hours. We reached a parking lot, and that's when I gave up. I decided to wait on a branch while my boyfriend got in the car. The parking lot was curved, so we're out of sight from each other, but he finally came back down to me with the car and helped me in. We found a gas station and slept for a little while before heading home. As we're driving out the park, we see a warning sign saying there may be an escaped convict in the area. This is a true story that happened to me. Back in the 80s, I was a camper at this place in the Adirondacks. a 6 million acre state park in upstate New York. All camps have their own customs, and I'm not sure if this occurred elsewhere, but if sitting around a campfire and smoke was blowing in your face, we would utter the phrase, "I hate white rabbits," and I swear this worked. The smoke would immediately move towards another direction. And no, it wasn't the breathiness of speaking the words that made the smoke move. It was rumoured to be a voodoo chant though. So things are different in the 80s. Things we did back then might have gotten you kicked out of camp if you got caught, but to be honest with you, these days, you would probably catch a court case and get jail time. Like the time my counsellor locked me in his room with a 6-pack of Budweiser, tall boys, and told me I can't come out until I finished. But that's a separate story. This camp was right on a very large and pristine lake, and periodically, there would be hikes and canoe trips to some of the islands on the lake. You choose your adventure, basically. So we're on this canoe hike to a large, huge, massive island that's not too far from camp at all. We're all slackers, smokers and stoners on this hike. My kind of people. The island was so big, it had a pretty wide running trail that went around the perimeter of the island, wide enough to comfortably ride a 4-wheeler around. Were they allowed? Wider than I was tall at the time, wide. So I mentioned this is in the 80s, right? That first night, some of us campers were partying with the counsellors, beers were being drunk. Now at the time we're sitting around a fire, of course, and when the smoke blew into someone's face, they said the phrase, "I hate white rabbits," and the smoke moved. The next reciprocate of the smoke said the same words, and so on. And the smoke was being moved around fast from person to person. At the height of the frenzied chanting, the smoke almost looks like a vortex. The next morning, I opened my tent to see lying on the ground, spanning the width of the running trail, the biggest dead rabbit I've ever seen in my life. It was dead. It had eyes that were glazed over blue and white. I've really never seen anything like this before. I know it could have just been coincidence, but it was crazy. This happened a couple of years ago. I wanted to go to the local wildlife trail to walk in the woods. I'd gone several times to hike and jog. I normally went with my boyfriend at the time, but he was working and I wanted to go, so I decided to go by myself. I felt pretty comfortable going. I park at the far end of the parking lot in case anyone else appears. The trail continues straight from the parking lot for about a mile until it curves up a large hill. Where I wanted to go was the abandoned parking lot with a lake. The turn off to this part of the trail was about 400 yards down to the left. Once you turn left, you have about 200 yards of flat trail before it inclines. This inclined section is loose gravel and it's quite noisy when you walk up it. The last section is about 100 yards. I felt pretty at ease going along the straight trail before I turned left. When I hit the incline, I began to feel uneasy. I brushed it off as being overly paranoid and continued. As I went about halfway up the incline, I began to hear crunching and snapping of twigs in the woods to my right. It sounded about 100 yards off. It was just far enough into the woods that I couldn't see what's making the noise. I froze in my tracks and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I stood still as I heard the crunching stop. Stupidly, I brushed it off as a deer or bobcat. I continue up the path until I hit the end of the incline. That's when I heard this thing in the woods beginning to run at me. I froze in fear, my heart beating 1,000,000 miles an hour. Every hair on my body stood up. I was rooted in place. that's when I saw him. A man was running straight for me while holding something in his hand. I began to run down the incline back to the main trail. I was slipping and sliding down the gravel. I looked behind me and noticed how that he's at the top of the incline already. He had this evil look in his eyes. I noticed the item in his hands was a knife. I almost slipped up due to me looking back at the man. He called out to me, "Get back here now." His tone was malicious. I sprinted as fast as I could and took a hard right back onto the main path. When I hit the parking lot, I didn't look back. I unlocked my car and started as quick as I can. Right as I was backing up, he emerges from the trail entrance. He just stands there, partially covered in the shade of the trees. As I tear through the parking lot and onto the highway, he just stares at me. The biggest, creepiest smile comes across his face as he slowly waves at me as I get onto the highway. I never went back to that trail. This encounter has scarred me for the rest of my life. I hate walking through the woods now. Okay, so I have no idea exactly what I saw that night. I have searched everywhere for sightings or even myths around that area we saw it and found nothing. If anyone has any idea what we saw, please let me know. My husband and I think it could have well been a Wendigo, but I don't know. I haven't heard anyone else say they've seen anything like it. I guess more than anything I want to know what I saw and have some closure. So anyway, my friends and I go camping a lot, and my favourite place is the Red River Gorge, Kentucky. We go there often. I've been going there since I was an infant. I'm 28 now, married with a kid and still go. It's the coolest place to go where I live, and you can actually see the Milky Way pretty much every night. I mean, it's perfect for stargazing, and I've seen a shooting star every clear night that I've been there. When we go there without our kid, we might have a hike and stargaze for hours. Our first experience happened when we were night hiking, and we would go on trails we knew well, and we used frequently during the day. Ones with log fences and gazebo resting places. The most used trail is in the National Bridge State Park that leads up to the Natural Bridge. The trail is around 2 miles uphill depending on where you're starting. Now I've done this trail every summer of my life and could do it blindfolded. It has wooden steps, carved rock steps, log handrails, multiple sitting points under a roof, trash cans, but after reaching the main trailhead there's no lights at all. It's used often, and while it's uphill and the difficulty is low, as long as you have a good grip on your shoes and water, you'll be fine. My friends have done it with me multiple times and we're confident as hell at it. Hiking this trail at night is not allowed, but the woods have never really been a problem for me and no one really cared about the closure times. When we use this main trail to hike to the top, we would park in a lot designated for the pool and hoedown island. You walk across the road that leads to the pool and you're at the first trail marker. You go up the gravel for a while and past the Natural Bridge State Park Lodge. There's a waterfall and some lights, so it was best to go fast and watch out for rangers that would tell us to leave. Then walk across another road and there's a mini shelter to sit on or a small rock where you can rest your legs. Then it's the beginning of the top of the trail. The night was weird to begin with. As soon as we started the hike, the clouds took over and it appeared we'd be walking for nothing even to stargaze at. But we went anyway, just in case it cleared out by the time we get there. In the beginning, it was normal, and paranoia was kinda setting in, but eased up a little. You know you've reached the bottom of the bridge when you see a giant limestone wall. Now during this time, there was a gazebo that set to the right of this wall, and the trail continued and followed next to the wall. When you come far, there's a fairly steep part of the trail and the gazebo is welcomed. Now my husband, my best friend at the time, and I all sit on the gazebo steps. The bench is under a roof and even darker than the rest of the outside, so we just stayed on the steps, facing to where we're looking downhill at the trail that follows the limestone wall. We each have a bright LED headlamp and a handheld flashlight. We don't usually look at each other when we night hike because the lights are so bright. We sit in a line like the Lord's Supper and walk in a line staggered so we don't blind each other. It's after hours at this point, so no ski lift rides had gone on for hours, and the rangers had already done the sweep and left before we could get there. We left no time between them making sure the trail and the top were clear and start our hike. The ski lifts takes you to the top, but there are workers that stay and do counts and only leave after it's clear. I guess I have to make these points because that's what I was thinking when what seemed out of nowhere, a girl with a headlamp begins to walk down the trail. This is kind of odd really. She's in a sundress and flip-flops. This hike is uphill, and while it's fairly easy to hike up, it's not easy to do without real shoes or water. She'd have to have hiked up and down to get to this point without food or water, which is a massive challenge. Her light seemed almost blinding too. When she reached where the trail turns from in front of the gazebo to down where we came from, she stopped. She just stood there, how a human is presented in an anatomical drawing. She was looking directly at us all, sitting there, and her light made me bring my head up. It was so bright that I literally had to shield my eyes. She didn't turn away from our light at all, or even seem bothered. She had 6 LEDs shining directly at her face. I say hello. She said, kind of with a pause between every word, something like, "Hello, how are you?" I said something like, "Good, how are you?" And she took an even longer pause before saying, "Oh, I'm fine." And she just stood there with her hands to her side, facing down, staring at us. Her light made it impossible to really see her face. It was unnaturally bright. I had my hand up the entire time to not be blinded still, until she turned and slowly walked down the trail part we just came up. She got to the part where the trail turned, and we saw her light just stay in that one spot for a minute, until she turned and the light faded out of sight. We wait for a while before continuing up. I kept making comments about how weird that was, and had anybody else just seen this? And was I being overly paranoid with my fear? And why did no one come after her? Why had she done this all alone at night? And somehow without being found by any ranger? We got up after a bit and started back up to the top. It felt like it took much longer than it ever had in the past, but we made it to the top. There's stone steps named Fat Man Squeeze that you get to at the top of the bridge, and you can walk across it and whatever. Going up and being on the top, we can hear twigs snapping, almost alternating from left to right. We lay down and stargaze, but the clouds are thicker now. It was miserably hot, and we can hear voices at the same time. My husband kept checking for people. He never saw anyone. We see a flashlight, but we never see anyone attached to it. And then we hear a bird call. It wasn't like a real bird noise at all. It was like someone making bird calls, rhythmic and not natural. I'm convinced now that we're not alone, and hadn't been alone at all during this. And to say this is a lot because I'm not easily spooked. I asked to leave as soon as they're done. They then tell me that they're ready to go right then and there, and that scared me. It showed that I wasn't imagining all of this and they're just as scared as I am. We began going down the way we came from, and it felt like it was taking so long. We were going steady and quick, and it was downhill, but we were not making any ground, it seems. It's hard to explain, but it was so weird to the point that I said aloud, "This feels much longer than it should be," and everyone agrees with me. I keep looking behind me with the flashlight, and my husband kept looking out to the sides. I kept feeling watched and couldn't figure out where the footsteps were coming from. It sounded as though they're coming from all directions. I would turn my head in the direction of a sound and not see anything. When my husband was walking, he kept saying he was catching eyes in the flashlight. Usually you catch a raccoon's eye spying on you, but he was afraid maybe it's a bigger animal like a bear or something. And even weirder is that he never seemed to catch contact with it truly when his flashlight went over it. By now, we're hiking down a semi-flattish area, compared to the downhill hike we've been doing at least. The log fence or handrail or whatever it's called is on our right side. Now, we're walking in a row within reaching distance of this barrier, and my husband just stops walking altogether and says, "What's that?" But the question is more of an alert than a question. I move my headlamp in that direction and don't see anything at first. Then, both of his lights catch a shape, and then my headlamp also does the same. I move my headlamp to the center and catch it while my friend simultaneously finds it in her lights as well. All six shine on a kind of reflective grey creature. It's bent in a crouching position, kneeling on its front leg, and it starts turning towards us. It starts to turn slowly, and my mind is racing. It looks like a human, but it's too big. People mistake human shapes for what's actually bears, but this is skinny. It's thin and big, and almost white. It's so light grey. Its skin resembles that of a dolphin. There's a shine to it, and our lights get reflected a little way when they're on it. It gradually comes to a standing position in front of us. Its head is long, and its eyes are in a human position on its face, not on the side like most animals. We can't see other facial features, just big, almost empty holes or pits where its eyes are. It looks directly at us in our lights. The way it stood is almost intimidating, almost like when a snake raises up and flexes their necks in a wild fashion to show how strong and smart they are. It was like it was stepping up for a fight, from crouching, then standing directly in front of us. The arms hung down so low, the hands seemed way too long. Its hands had to be by its knees easily. I guess it stood 9 feet or so, and not that far in front of us. No, it has no hair at all, and its head is large. I couldn't process what I was seeing. I was truly frozen. Then, I just feel my husband hitting me, yelling, "Run." I start to understand we have to get away from this thing, and it pivots and runs to the right, going backwards on the trail so it could get around the barrier and onto the trail behind us. We take off running the rest of the way down the trail, knowing that this thing just took off much faster than us, and after it had crossed from behind the barrier, it would be gaining on us quick. We didn't talk at all because we tried to figure out what was going on and knew it wasn't good to draw attention to us. We kept running as fast as we could, but some areas are steep. It literally never feels as though we're out of sight from this creature. And we made it to the trail beginning with the gravel, and we can hear something to the side crashing down through the forest. We ran until we got to the car, then drove as fast as we could, and as soon as we got to the main road, we're finally out of there. When that thing looked at us, I knew it was smarter and faster than us. I knew that if we didn't react, something terrible would have happened. We made it back to where we're all staying, and all of us took out our phones and wrote a note of what we saw. We haven't spoke about it until after, and we all looked at each other's phones and the stories are all exactly the same. When I was 12, me and a group of my friends would play hide and seek in those woods where we're on the edge of our neighbourhood. We would always play at around 6, but had to be home by 10:30 at the latest on a weekend, and we weren't allowed to go so far that we couldn't see our houses. Those are the only rules our parents had for us. Well, one Friday, we're out playing in the woods as usual, and I, for whatever reason, decided to go in the woods deeper. I can't remember how far I went into those woods, but I do remember coming across an old shack. I considered using it as a hide-in place, but then I thought that they wouldn't come this deep into the woods to look for me, so I decided to head back. However, when I started to head back, I turned my head to look at the same shack one last time, and for a split second, I see someone peeking around the door. Whoever it was quickly turns their head back when they saw me, and I don't pay much attention to it and head back. I'm about halfway through my walk when I hear, "Hey kid, come over here." I look back and see an old man hiding behind a tree, gesturing for me to come. I know better, and took off running. While I was running, I heard him yelling, "Wait now, come back," and I could also hear the sounds of other footsteps accompanying him after me. When I got to the end of the woods, I ran into my friend's house, who was wondering where I was. I told them to get out of the woods, and we ran to our friend's house. I told them what happened, and eventually, I told my mum what happened too. Our parents called the police to search for the woods, but they never found anything, and our parents never let us play out again after that. Old man living in the shack, you could still be out there. I just hope you get caught and haven't done anything worse. My old man was an avid outdoorsman in the Colorado Rockies in the late 80s. He'd go on week-long treks with his buds. One summer, they'd been out for a few days in the Pikes National Forest. They set up camp in a ravine they thought was safe. That night, my dad unzipped the tent to take a leak in the dark, and outside stood a pair of bare pale feet. My dad screamed and zipped up the tent. Everyone else woke up and said, "What's wrong?" My dad said someone was barefoot out there, and they went out and flashed their flashlights for a bit, hollering. My dad swore that he saw the feet and described them in perfect detail. They were old blotchy feet, even having a lump on the ankle. Tony, his bud, asked what foot, left or right, and my dad said it was the right. Then Tony said they needed to move their camp immediately. My dad says why. Tony says he doesn't have time to explain. They all go along with it and pack up and move up to the hill. The next morning they woke up to find a flash flood had torn through the ravine that night. It would have surely killed them. Tony's grandfather had just died a month prior, and one of the last things he said to him was that he would always watch over him. The feet described reminded Tony of his grandfather's very feet. My dad is highly religious too. Supernatural or not, it's terrifying what happened to them. So this happened to me when I was about 7, and I lived in Portland with my grandparents. Now my grandma and I would always watch Lost together every night. and then the news would always come on afterwards. When we saw there was a sniper that was going around our area, in the woods somewhere, and they were looking for him, and lost his location, it blew our minds. I remembered one day at school, the whole school had to go on lockdown, because someone reported seeing him near the school, and so everyone had to go to the hall and wait out the entire situation to clear. I don't think we left school until 7 PM. The police caught him and took him in for questioning. Later on, we found out through the news that he was hiding out in these small woods that are behind our house, literally meters away. Now my grandma and I would go for bike rides and walks most evenings. The only reason we hadn't was because of the shooter. I refused to leave the house for a good week or so because I was scared that he'd still be out there, and I wouldn't let my grandparents leave either because I was so scared something bad would happen to them. To this day, I still have a mini panic attack every time I go near them woods. Just the thought that at some point in time, only meters away, there was a killer waiting in the woods in camouflage terrifies me. It was the end of my freshman year of college, so my friend and I spent a weekend at my family's cabin by ourselves to celebrate. The weekend was fairly uneventful. The most exciting things to happen were burning a pizza on a grill and a chipmunk trying to join me while I was in the outhouse, which was pretty funny. But then, we had to leave. Even though I'd gone to the cabin every summer since I was born, I still didn't know very well how to get from it. We had been using my friend's dad's GPS. It was pretty old and probably hadn't been updated in a while, which is likely why it took us where it did. The route we took was fairly unfamiliar to me, but what do I know? It's a GPS. I trusted it enough to bring us wherever we needed to go. It ended up taking us down a twisted side road that I knew was wrong, but I kept going, thinking that maybe going through the woods would be faster. That's when it told me to take a left. I obeyed, but was extremely confused because it looks to be a dirt road. I slowed down to look at the GPS when my friend lets out a horrid, "Oh my god." I look up and realise we're not on the road at all. We're on someone's driveway. Then I saw the dolls. They were worn by the weather, full of dirt and faded from the sun. The ones I took note of were clowns, and bodiless and beheaded. There were so many, I can't even make out how many there actually are. Every single one's hanging from a tree. My friend and I were both shrieking at this point. Her yelling at me to back up and get out of there, me yelling what the hell over and over again. We safely got back to the main road and followed that until the GPS gave us a different route, which took us home without incident. Although I didn't see the person living in that rundown house, it was one of the most terrifying things that ever happened to me. It didn't even feel real when it was happening. It felt like I'd been dropped into the middle of a horror movie about a serial killer with some doll fetish or something. Sometimes, I wonder what would have happened if the person who lived there actually saw me pulling up. But I try not to let my imagination get the best of me. I hate to think of whoever's responsible for that house, if they still lived there.